It's all about fostering a collaborative community effort to develop an open foundation for any organization to create their own digital wallets on top. So it's really just saying that we should have an open wallet, which does make sense, but they're not going to actually build it.
Yeah. Okay. Um, where do we go? We go into the tech news. Are we ready for that? Did we cover? I saw one just moments ago.
The one thing I did want to say is I wanted to applaud the Thai authorities, I think it's the Thai authorities, for arresting Do Kwon of Terraform Labs. I think that is extremely good action. I think he deserves to be arrested.
Do Kwon, Terra. Let's see, Thailand. Let's see. Do Kwon on Twitter. Thailand is part of the Terra it deserves. Let's look up the news. Do Kwon prepares Terra Hard Fork. Biology. Did that happen today?
I think I just saw it flash up here.
Yeah.
It was at the top.
It must be really breaking news because I don't yet see it popping up. So one of the things that apparently Peter Zeihan, he tweeted a few hours ago that he's hearing multiple reports, that Russians are evasing or evacuating Melitopol, which is just north of Crimea. And he says this remains unconfirmed, but if true, Ukraine can reach the Black Sea and blow the Kerch Bridge, which gives the water supply to Crimea. And in doing so, it would make Crimea very unattractive as it was previous to this whole invasion. And let's see tomorrow if that holds true. But it might be true because another kind of on the same topic tweet that I found earlier today from a defense reporter from the Kyiv Independent says that 5,000 Ukrainian troops have completed their training in the UK to join the fight. And as if Putin didn't have enough shit on his hands, he's now got another 5,000 very eager, freshly trained folks, which, by the way, is partly why Ukraine's kicking Russia's ass on the lines lately, as of late, is because of a whole new batch of newly trained folks that are not fatigued and angry as hell and ready to jump over the lines, and they've been doing that to great effect. And now you've got 5,000 more en route. So I wouldn't want to be in
The
Putin's shoes.
question is what happens to the cornered tiger when they approach Crimea? That's one big question.
Precisely.
And how far does he start to use remote military power, which could be devastating?
Yes. And Nicholas, that's exactly right. And that raises the third article that I saw today. And in fact, I think Cheryl was the one who found it. Oh, no, it was Bibi, although maybe both. From Reuters, Putin and Xi are to meet any day now in Uzbekistan on Thursday. That's tomorrow. That's an emergency meeting if ever there was one. And the fact that it's in Uzbekistan tells you that it's an emergency meeting. And
but also they're going to talk about Taiwan, so you have some false equivalents there.
Well, check it out. So they say they're going to talk about Ukraine and Taiwan, and then Putin goes on to say that the meeting would hold, quote unquote, special significance given the geopolitical situation. Now, what I think it's safe to assume, I'm just connecting dots as I'm kind of known for doing, that Putin, if he is going to escalate to a highly mobilized, highly aggressive, missile-based, attack, which he has no choice but to do, to be honest. He's going to lose on the ground on the manpower front. He's lost. He's already lost that. He's losing. He's in the process of losing it, and he's going to continue to lose it. And he has no choice at this point but to retaliate with carpet bombing and all kinds of egregious stuff. And before he can do that, he has to go to his daddy. So Big Daddy Vladdy has to go visit Big Daddy Xi to get Big Daddy Xi's permission to carpet bomb and
Exactly.
retaliate in this way. And why do we know this? Because guess who Putin met 48 hours before the invasion started in Beijing during the Olympics? Oh, what a coincidence. He met Uncle Xi right before, 48 hours before the invasion. And now he's going to meet him again. Gee, I wonder what they're going to talk about. Because
My
He's going to be
understanding is
told
that
to.
he
He's going to
does
be
have
told
a
to negotiate.
choice, and the choice is to be more forceful about getting recruits from the western part of Russia. As I just heard yesterday, that there were only 11 people killed who were actually from St. Petersburg or Moscow. All of the people who are being recruited and killed in action actually come from the eastern part of the country. So to be more forceful in the recruiting is his other option, but of course that would be very unpalatable to people in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Well,
People in
he is having problems. I read an article that he tells, or the news tell people that they are getting, I don't know, thousands of new recruits, but it's all fake. Like, it's not actual recruits. And actually, the right-wing conservative media supported that that fact. So it's not like just European media is supporting that. And this meeting with China, to be honest, I think when Russia started invading Ukraine, I think they thought Europe wouldn't resist as much, and especially not Germany, because until now, in every conflict since World War II, um, the Germany kind of pulled back. They said, "Yeah, we agree, but we won't do anything about it." No matter it was Iraq or Libya, and so on. So every time they said, "Yeah, we kind of think you're right, but we are not participating in anything," and this time they kind of stick together, and I think
Yes,
it's
Angela Merkel.
changing. I don't think China wants to be on at war yet with Europe and US and India and different, like all these countries, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think both China and the U.S. are both sides are not ready for a full-scale war. So, but Tyler, you said you said Putin's going to see the big data. That's very, very. I think it's very fun and funny because historically, basically Russia was always the big daddy to China because of the Soviet Union and all this communism relationship. So it's just like you said that the tides are changing. So right now, Russia needs more help from China instead of the China in the history ask help from Russia. So right now, and I brought in the beginning of the room that the U.S. government, the Congress, is now discussing a Taiwan Policy Act of 2022. It seems to where if this act passed, it's gonna escalate the tension between the three sides. I mean, China, the U.S. and Taiwan as well. But just like I said, the U.S. government, I don't think and the Chinese government, both sides are not ready for a full scale uh, war toward each other. So
She's
I
got
don't know.
plenty on his plate. He's got a full-on economic crisis. He's got a full-on mortgage crisis. He's got a COVID zero issue. So I don't think he's looking for more action at the moment.
I agree on China, but can you hear me, guys, or is it too
yeah,
low?
I hear you.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to point out the importance of Moscow and Petersburg population, because if there's any group of people that can have impact on what's going on with this war, outside of obviously Kremlin and some generals, is the people. There's no democracy in Russia, but there is certain power to opinion, and that opinion of Moscow and Peter is the opinion that actually can impact a little bit what's going on, a direction. So this is a very, very important space to watch. And if Moscow will start to recruit this, young, privileged crowd to because they will be so desperate, that that will be another war, basically, because there will be such a revolt and people will protest. They're not interested in a war, and they will just want to live their middle class, upper class, whatever class they live in lives. They're not different from New Yorkers or whatever community. Moscow is beautiful. It's an amazing place, and people are used to certain lifestyle, and I can't imagine them going to war right now.
Okay,
I,
so
I had mentioned earlier Stephen Kotkin, an academic, to Piotr, and a few months later he came back in the back channel and said, "Hey, you were right. Should have checked that out." If you look at this through the lens of information, I'm glad we got Nicholas here. Um, I'm just concerned that there's not enough information tracking to these leaders, these autocrats, of how dire their situation is, and only their own filter bubble of thinking it's okay to be as cruel as these nations have a history of being in the past. But I also look at it through the lens of Russia's becoming the next North Korea from a resource standpoint for China. So the more I think she's going there to tell Putin, go sue for peace, take this cropland that you can feed our nation with, set up a pipeline for 20 years for us to be your you to be a principality of our energy needs, and we'll just do it without the weapons.
hmm, 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 hmm. I can't wait to see what happens. Honestly, after Thursday.
I just
My
want to
gut
point
feeling.
out that even Russian uh, reached out to for even the North Korea for the artillery, but China didn't provide any help in that way. So it's very complicated there as well.
I
I
can't
think.
imagine
I think.
China getting into this too deeply. I just can't, because I don't think that they want to risk the markets and the connection with West. And also, this war doesn't make any sense, logically. So, if there would be something that would really make sense, then maybe yes, but it doesn't.
It,
I
it,
mean, in
the,
terms
the,
of China
if
that
they
has
won,
no.
if they won Ukraine, it made sense, but it's been downhill since the invasion. This whole mimetic layer is where I'd like us to explore how this has been a fracture from January on between the West and the East, and that's what we came to talk about. War never makes sense once you're in the fog.
It
Nicholas,
doesn't make sense because it doesn't change situation of Russia economy. It doesn't help this part of the world. If you look like China Russia bloc, it actually weakens everyone. And yeah, the territory today, gaining new territory today, has a very little impact on economic growth. So in this sense, this war doesn't make sense in the sense that Russia is burning money through investing in this war. It's actually not gaining a little bit through the prices of oil. That's only gain, and China doesn't have any interest in that because I don't think that they are producing too much of that. So why would they be interested in spinning something that actually destroys markets and doesn't help anyone? They are pragmatic, I think. I mean, at China.
okay. Nicholas, you were cut off briefly.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think that it would make sense for Xi to look like the peacemaker ahead of the meeting in October, for him to effectively bolster his position by, suing for peace and saying, let him save face by keeping the Crimea and giving him rights over that. I think that Europe will heave a sigh of relief before the winter, and they would go for it. Whether Zelensky will go for it, given that he's got them on the run, and I suspect he would be convinced by America, who have effectively won this war without firing a bullet, which has actually allowed for the dollar to become king dollar, as we've seen through the Dixie, the dollar index. And I think that whilst Putin would probably not turn back on Nord Stream, and there would still be an energy crunch, it would enable everybody to come out with a win. And I suspect the punishment would be that the Americans would suggest that the 300 billion that they froze of Russian assets will be used to cover the damage that he's and paid as damages, and the Chinese would look like they brokered themselves into a bipolar position whereby they are the buyer of the energy. I think that Russia would remain somewhat of a pariah state. I think it would be difficult to do to allow them back on the international scene immediately, but it gives everybody a way out, and I think markets would rally on the back of it. And if they could get the price down, it would immediately dial back inflation, which would be massively in Biden's interest.
Okay, so
Wow. Sorry. Okay, this is not a political room or foreign policy room, but I was kind of thinking in terms of the solutions that are presented here. I wish it was that simple.
okay, well, there's another issue, which is Zelensky has said that they refuse to meet on any conditions that would require Ukraine to give up any land at all, including Crimea.
Exactly. It's their land. They're not willing to give up an inch, and they are willing to sacrifice their lives for it. And they are a sovereign nation. So nobody can decide what they wish to do for their own lives and their land. So any proposal for the solution from external sources is not acceptable for Zelensky and his
They're
people.
being armed to the
Yeah,
teeth by the Americans and the Western alliance, and they owe a ton of money, which is, that's what it's going to come down to in fitness versus truth terms. That's, what's likely to be the compromise. I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. He said what he said about Crimea, but I suspect if they could have a peace, they would let this, bring this to an end, and he'd get a lot of plaudits from the international community and a lot of support. And $300 billion doesn't sound too bad either for rebuilding the mess that Putin's created.
The question is of his internal political support for that, because Ukrainians, as Erum said very, very intelligently, as always, that that there is this fear that, I mean, not fear, but people will. He was elected by Ukrainian nation. Ukrainians are very, very upset with the Crimea situation. Now, there is possibility, Aaron, that people will be so tired with war, and if world can actually make sure that Russia is not going to continue attacking Ukraine, that there will be real ceasefire. Maybe at some point people will say, we lived with Ukraine being Russian for a couple of years, and now we lost so many lives, and we have a chance to end this war. So that's a political decision. It's very hard for me to, being here in America, to proceed to see what is the temperature of Ukrainian nation today. But I can imagine a situation when people will just say, Afghan, this is enough. And I saw situations in the history of the world when people step down from certain territories in order to maintain peace. And as long as the peace is actually really stable, the problem that Ukrainians have with Russia is that the agreements, Russia doesn't keep any agreements that they make. And that, I think, is part of the equation if world can assure Russians keeping those peace agreements.
Okay, So personally, I think it would be very interesting for if Europe were to do something that we know they'll never do, which is Europe would love control of those oil pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and 2, and get those out of the hands of Russia. And they could continue to support Ukraine after they've liberated Ukraine and to push even further through up to St. Petersburg and the sources of those pipelines and take control of that stuff as reparations for the shenanigans of Mr. Putin. Anywho,
That's in the realm of Santa Claus. My
yes,
feeling
I
is
agree.
that's
I know it is, but I'm just saying in a perfect world. So let's do the tech news. I think we've exhausted the non-tech news for today. So protocol requires that we ring the air horn, and here we go. So the top tech story today, Wednesday, September 14th, is that the iPhone 14 Pro has excellent performance, and the 48 megapixel camera is incredible, according to The Verge. But the dynamic island isn't fully utilized yet. Well, we know that because the app developers are writing the code now for the apps to get updated. They didn't know. And camera sharpening is too much, whatever that means. And then The Verge has a separate piece that says Apple iPhone 14 review, improved selfie camera and good battery life, but feels like an iPhone 13s without ProMotion, and the eSIM transition could be painful. I guess they're on. I guess people are getting their hands on them now, or is it only the journalists? When is the ship date for that?
16 is the beginning of. Oh no, 16 was pre-orders. It's probably we can.
Okay.
Tyler, I can just briefly comment on the camera sharpening is too much. I think I know what they mean.
Okay.
They're just saying that it's applying a sharpening filter to the images, and if you do that too much, you start to get a kind of white outline around things, and you start to get these artifacts come in, and that can be too much. So simply that.
Thanks for that. Bloomberg says an EU court backs the European Commission's decision to fine Google over Android antitrust breaches, but trims the fine from 4.3 billion to 4.1 billion. Because that was just too much. Going to 4.3 billion. Should have been 4.1. So Google lost the first round of its battle to topple the $4.3 billion euro. And that Google was complaining about this 4.3 billion euro thing. And so the EU court steps in and says, you're right. It is too much. Make it 4.1 billion.
They can still appeal.
Yes. A South Korean court issues an arrest warrant for Terraform Labs founder Do Kwon and 5 others located in Singapore following the collapse of Luna and UST. The court in South Korea issued the arrest warrant for Do Kwon. And the question is, where is Do Kwon? And that leads me to share something I don't think I've ever shared in goddamn 20 years, which is, God, what year was this? 99? I did a little bit of performance art where I created a website at a time in 99 when that was not trivial to do. And I had a $10,000 reward if you could find me. And I had the first digital portable camera money could buy. And I was taking digital photos at a time when no one had ever seen or heard of a digital camera. And I was uploading them to a server running a Python script that was circling through the photos I was uploading. And to give you some context, I would have to pull out the memory card, put it into a computer, and upload FTP those files over to my server onto my site so that you could see where I was. And I would do that every few hours. I would do that like 2 or 3 times a day. And if you could find where I was, there was a $10,000 reward. Anyway, and I did interviews back then with Scientific America and others, and journalists took the bait and wrote about it. It was kind of a fun little project. And then Matt Damon tried to sell it as a TV show to Fox, and then I had to cease and desist on him, and successfully did that. Anyway, because I registered it as a treatment as well with the Writers Guild, and Ben Affleck went into rehab shortly after that. Anyway, I can tell the full version of that story is far more interesting. But long story short, Do Kwon is in a perfect position to relaunch my find me anywhere thing, because you don't need a website anymore, and we have the thing called smartphones now, with cameras and all kinds of apps that you could create an incredibly compelling global manhunt, which he could probably raise an incredible amount of money if he were to do that. And I look forward to someone doing it. It might as well be him, because the world's going to be looking for him. So you might as well monetize it. Although did he leave with a decent amount of value with him or not? He must have something stashed away somewhere.
Do Kwon?
Yeah.
I don't know, but he's he deserves to be imprisoned for the acts, the fraudulent statements and willful ignorance, I think. But yeah, I'm sure he took some money off the table.
Right,
but let's hope they get him.
Why is it a South Korean court that's issuing this arrest warrant?
I think probably because the South Korean community were deeply affected, the users. So I suspect that it's more like a class action, type of approach to protect South Korean citizens who would have lost a lot of money staking terror.
Yeah. Okay, next up, Patreon cuts 17% of its staff, or 80 positions, and closes an office in Dublin and Berlin. The company raised $155 million in April 2021 at a $4 billion valuation. The creator subscription company Patreon is the latest company to be affected by a long line of tech layoffs.
Tyler.
Yes, Tom.
You know where that caused a lot of controversy? They let go of the whole entire security team.
Patreon did?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, you can Google that one, because there's a whole big initiative trying to help their whole security team get new jobs. And then they're all and then there's rumors that it was outsourced, I guess for cheaper labor, which from my experience, that usually ends up in a disaster.
And it's usually someone who's been on the inside who wants to make a point.
Scary. So next article from Reuters: a South Korean privacy regulator fines Google $50 million and Facebook, or Meta rather, $22 million for failing to obtain users' consent when collecting behavioral data to show targeted ads. I'm loving South Korea and how they're handling and dealing with big tech, because they actually understand what's going on. Similar to the Apple, Google Play Store, Apple Store, and how they, very unfairly position themselves as the only way to, for the app developers to collect fees from their users.
You've also got a domestic behemoth in Samsung that is worthwhile protecting.
True that. South Korea levied tens of millions of dollars in fines on Alphabet's Google and Meta for privacy violations. And these are biometric. That was the key word that got my attention, was the biometric part. It's like, what kind of biometric data are they monetizing without your willful consent? The article's paywalled, so maybe if we go to the TechCrunch version, we'll find out. It says the South Korea has hit them with a big fine. The watchdog said in a statement that Google and Meta did not receive legitimate consent in the process of collecting information from users who visit their websites and use other websites, as well as apps for customized advertisements. Google did not clearly inform users of the collection and use of other companies' behavioral information when they signed up for its services and set the default choice to agree, while covering up further options available via this setting screen. The country's authorities explained in the press release. Meta was also found to have violated personal information protection rules. This is the largest penalty in South Korea for violating personal information protection laws, which, by the way, the EU has similar user data protection laws in place. GDPR comes to mind. And this could set up potentially could have a bit of a domino effect into Europe and whatnot. Let's see how that shakes out. Overseas watchdogs have fined Google and Facebook for failing to comply with data protection regulations in recent years. In 2019, the French data protection watchdog issued its first regulation fine of 57 million. And WhatsApp was
the European Union have been, very active in this arena, and have done a good job. I mean, sometimes a little bit heavy-handed, but you can't be too heavy-handed with the technocracy. But sometimes their legislation makes user experience or affects user experience, I think.
Okay, next up from Nikkei Japan, they say they have sources that Apple plans to use TSMC's 3-nanometer chip-making process expected in the second half of next year for its A17 chips in some 2023 iPhones and its M3 chips that will come out in future versions of Mac laptops and what have you. So when the M3 comes out, it will be 3-nanometer. And the A17 iPhones will be 3-nanometer. So you're likely to see notable performance increases in the 2023 phones and laptops. Very interesting. The next is the U.S. Treasury clarifies its Tornado Cash guidance and tells users who use the service for lawful transactions can apply for a license to withdraw their funds. New guidance from U.S. Treasury Department Office of Foreign Asset Controls provides a roadmap for people who use Tornado Cash to get their money out legally.
So basically, they'll continuing censoring free speech, but they will allow people who had previously relied on free speech to use the service to make themselves known, dox themselves, and if they, therefore want to get their money out, they will have to be subjected to the additional scrutiny of applying to the DOJ or whoever is in charge.
Okay. In a email to developers, Apple says that the new App Store ad placements will be available for the 2022 holiday season. Apple's planning to release new ad placements as soon as the holiday season of this year. The new ad units represent a significant expansion in Apple's advertising inventory. So this is very...
They're talking about this being worth 30 billion to the bottom line for Apple because there's really no cost, and it goes towards the effect of the cookie ban and all of the other action that they've taken to stymie Meta, etc. So the privacy-oriented world of Apple is now going to be paid for by the new advertising elite.
Right. And this is unfortunate, and I think Apple users have a right to be a little upset because when you go to the Apple App Store today, it's basically an ad-free environment, and the rankings of things when you look under productivity or when you do a search for calendar apps and it shows you all the calendar apps, the ranking of those is largely based on reviews and how long people have that app installed before they delete it, and how often people use that app and how happy they are with the app. And they all, like Google, it's a very complex algorithm that determines who gets to be the to-do list app at the top of the results when you search for a to-do list app or note-taking app. Who's the top note-taking app? And if you're the top note-taking app, that's worth, you could be a unicorn if you're at the top of each of those categories. If you're the top list app recommended under calendar apps, you can make a unicorn out of that. I think Calendly has. If you have the top dog walking app, any category you can think of, you can make a unicorn out of that. So this is incredibly valuable real estate to be the top result for any type of app in the App Store, of which there are hundreds, if not thousands. So they're now going to sell that spot. That those top precious spots will now be up for bidding in an auction, and they will be ad based, and just like Google searches are. And the difference is you didn't pay Google anything. And that's why they're going to monetize based on those ads. You did pay Apple a very considerable amount of money for the device that is now showing you these ads. So it's a little bit of a minor rug pull in my mind as to me it's also slightly devalues the value proposition of Apple generally, and that's why they've kind of resisted doing this until now. I think they've always known they could always do this. Anywho,
By the way, Tyler, if that's the case, will Tyler, not Tyler, Apple, so-called make sure that they have done the due diligence to make sure that those ads that, I mean, those company that pay them for those top spots in the ads are not carrying some malware when you download them?
True that. Yeah, because you could have VPN apps. You search for VPN, whatever comes up in the future.
They
Whatever
have total,
you'll get
they have
ads
total
for
control of the
VPN
App
apps
Store anyway.
that are selling your data for sure.
They have that. They have total control of the App Store, and they approve every app, and they approve all of that anyway. So they do the filtering for you, but they have many a time allowed for breaches to occur of your private data. But now they've got a vested interest in being the monopolists over your private data, and I think exactly as you said. Under the freemium model, if you pay nothing, you expect to be the product. But they highlighted that, if you didn't pay anything, then you should expect to be the product, Tim Cook said. But in this particular situation, you paid $1,000 for a mobile phone, and you should not expect that you then need to be monetized by the richest company on earth. It's just, frankly, disgraceful.
Let's be
Yeah,
realistic.
and sorry,
Microsoft
Tom.
will probably buy those ads, and then Apple will regret it.
Yeah, as a customer, the difference between the Apple ecosystem and the reason I shifted from Windows to Apple was this huge difference in terms of ads that are shown to you, different viruses that were, requiring a lot of cleanup of Windows, and all the time there was like you know, there's a huge difference in the Apple experience. And if Apple is going to eradicate that policy and change the user's experience to something just like Windows, being exposed to ads all the time, I'm no more interested in this product. I'm not going to be, paying this much money and then have the same experience. Then I might as well go back and buy a PC computer, which is way cheaper, or other cheaper phones and services. So personally, I'm not gonna like that. Also, the investors, what are their thoughts? All the shareholders, are they okay with this situation? I'm not really comfortable that Apple, if they are deciding to do this, make this decision, making their services or products just like any other, then they should be charging this much money.
Yep. Okay. So the next one is PlayStation VR2 review. And The Verge says it's easy to set up, a joy to use. The OLED display looks great. And the new controllers are an improvement. Gameplay is fun and more. And that sound you hear is Mark Zuckerberg losing his shit over a very viable competitor emerging there with Sony. The next is Engadget says that the EA, Electronic Arts, unveils something called EA Anti-Cheat, a kernel-level anti-cheat system for some PC games launching September 23rd. Who cares? Next, the Wall Street Journal says they have sources after its funds This is a very weirdly worded headline. Okay, Wall Street Journal has sources. It's about SoftBank. And so after SoftBank funds performed poorly, I'm just trying to make it legible. After SoftBank's funds performed poorly, it considers launching a third Vision Fund. Vision Fund 2 is now worth 19% less than the $49 billion invested in it. So despite massive losses, Japanese billionaire Masayoshi Son has tried to chart a new path for the tech investment giant with the third fund. Bloomberg says a New York federal judge dismisses the New York State Attorney General's claims that Meta and Google colluded via Jedi Blue, but rules that the ad tech antitrust lawsuit against Google can proceed. In Washington Post, it says, as Meta spends billions on VR, some developers worry over strict App Store rules, using acquisitions to dominate the market and throttle competition and more. Yeah, no doubt about that. Facebook is given half of a chance, will try to create a VR monopoly if it can. And now you know why The Verge is singing the praises of the Sony VR headset, because everyone else outside of Facebook wants an ecosystem and precisely doesn't want Facebook to be a monopoly in VR. Really, nobody wants that other than Facebook, and Facebook very, very desperately does want that, of course, because that would be wildly lucrative if they could pull that off, but they can't because no one wants that to happen except them. And so anyway, you can read that one if you want to go deeper on that. Disinformation campaigns use text messages ahead of the 2022 US midterms. Oh, interesting. Who's behind the disinformation campaigns leading up to the midterms? And very interesting that they are text messages. Voters got texts falsely saying a yes vote would protect abortion access on a particular issue, trying to fool people into incorrectly voting. How dare you assume Americans are so stupid? The
There
biggest,
are also emails I'm receiving, Tyler, from our local, politician offices, saying that Biden's Satan-related some contract he made with Satan, which is going to. Okay, I have to go and read back what they are exactly saying, but yes, all kind of stuff is coming out in emails.
Whoa, amazing.
while there's now a cottage industry and federal agencies that target election disinformation, when it's on social media, there's no comparable effort for texts. Yeah, okay. Now, this is kind of fantastic, actually, because you know how much trouble Facebook, to name one, Facebook has gotten itself in a whole lot of hot seat because of how it, quote unquote, mishandled misinformation related, leading up to elections in multiple countries, right? We're all aware of this. Are we not, class? Yes, we are. So, who's
And
responsible?
and they didn't have an officer telling them to not take rubles for ads. I think they got that in place now, right? Just
Yeah, because Russia is known to be spending considerably to even though, yeah, they're allowed to run ads, which Facebook is doing, and Twitter and Google, they're all doing. And anyway, so, but what happens when it's done via SMS, which is a rather open protocol? Are the telecom companies now going to have to do content moderation on the SMSs? Is T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T and Orange and Three Telecom and Vodafone and everyone else, are they now going to have to get into the content moderation game and think twice before you answer? Because that would mean they're now going to have to review all SMSs and put in filters and ban all kinds of phrases in your SMSs? Or do we want an open, moderated list SMS system? So, what to do when something bad's happening? Do you hit it with a hammer, unaware that your foot is just below? And as we have done, as many would argue, with social media, that all of the efforts to moderate everything, uh, in some cases, causes more problems than it was intending to fix. I think most people would. That's why I love the fact that this is happening on text, because it really forces the issues. Should telecom companies be treated just like big tech companies that are enabling communications? You could, if you look at WhatsApp, it's not real so different from SMS at the scale that it's doing it. I would love to see a comparison of the number of WhatsApp messages versus the number of SMS messages globally annually. I bet they're not that far off.
And a lot of people actually in Africa, you tend to use WhatsApp whenever the internet is available, because you don't have cost, right? Their data and other internet access will charge them, but what with WhatsApp, at least free in quotation, it is free. And also because of the censorship in most African countries, where most of us are paranoid that someone is looking at your texting and other stuff, that we tend to use WhatsApp. So that would be really, really interesting to know, at least from the African perspective.
Well,
I am the most interested in one thing actually. Would they be able, using AI, let's say, to limit amount of scam, because there's such a problem of especially elderly people being taken their money away in a horrible way. And that I would be like, would we be willing to sacrifice our privacy? Not necessarily only for like people who potentially, attack people in an unpleasant way, because you can basically block them and you can take them to court. But the biggest problem, I think, is the scam. Scam, am I saying the right word in English? When people try to pretend someone that the grandson is in need, please send me $500 or something like that, and people being, sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 300,000, and those scams are really, really, really big problem.
There
so
is a problem with the legitimacy of your vote and the election process, and the misinformation related to that, creating doubts, creating this impression that our votes are not safe, or the entire process is kind of somehow not valid. So to me, that's a problem, because if we can't even trust the way we are voting, then the trust in democracy and the entire government and the systems can be challenged. That's the kind of mindset I see spreading by this disinformation, misinformation campaigns. And I was also wondering, aren't there any legal repercussions of spreading such misinformation? Because it's about the legality of your vote process. So I see people use social media for all kind of misinformation, disinformation campaigns, sharing lies, sharing rumors about politicians, and all of that is kind of a culture. But when you start attacking the system of voting itself, then how far is that from actually attacking your democratic process? So to me looks like any power which is outside of the United States, which want to see the country weaken from internally, would target the voting related disinformation. So legally, there should be some stricter laws preventing and inhibiting such campaigns.
Yeah, especially because people are quitting their jobs for a year now because they got threats all the time and their families got threats that take care that the electoral process is going, say, in a safe way and correct way, and they've been getting a lot of threats that people are quitting. And if they find people that will do this job, who will replace them? So the really ground for democracy are those people. And if they start all quitting their jobs, and because we can't find anyone else, we replace them with not trustworthy people or that don't do it for democracy and are kind of neutral, then we kind of start destroying our democracy from the ground up.
I think also the social media is also the Aram, what she's saying about misinformation. That has been really the biggest problem. Even here in Ethiopia, we have had the civil war for years now, like 2 years or 2 years, and misinformation is just the biggest issue on it. And I think the social media, the platforms give the platform the name to just spread all that misinformation, the tweeting, mistweeting, and retweeting, and just how exponentially
But
sorry. I
well, by
just
my
got a word.
understanding
Okay.
is that we were talking about messaging systems. Messaging systems are personalized, and can imagine people sending SMSs about or WhatsApp messages about voting system. But more often, it's more personal, and as I said, mentioned like a scam problem. But the problem is that if we're talking about monitoring people's communications, increasing monitoring people's communication, there's other flip side to this entire conversation, which is privacy. Because I'm saying I'm willing to sacrifice my privacy if certain older people are not going to be scammed by SMSs or private messages. That's what I said. But am I mean, are we really so easily giving up on that? Because that means that there will be third party reading every message, and if we put responsibility on a phone company or someone like WhatsApp to monitor every conversation, that means thousands of people reading other people's information, including financial information sometimes, yes, or other private sensitive bits, and then always there is this possibility that someone will put it online, which happened when people's exchanges were put online on a public display. So this is the fear that comes with it. Yes, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, but even messaging, there are many groups, big groups that I see here that misinformation spreads out. And how do you? I agree with you that maybe there is the option that where you want to monitor and have. Getting the right information to people so that they are not being taken advantage of. But also at the same time, that same platform, whether it's texting or anything, that also gives the opportunity for someone to actually send out misinformation. And some people are not really taking into the same way the scams usually really defrauds people because they really sometimes do not take the extra steps or other things that they take advantage of. Misinformation is the same thing. Someone sends you misinformation, and we don't investigate them. We don't have too much time for texting even to investigate every single text that you get. Then it spreads. It's the exact same problem that we have.
Okay.
Tyler, can I make a comment? This is Shaheen.
Of course you can.
Yeah, sorry to extend this very long conversation. I think the view is that one aspect of it is to evaluate and approve a content, which is a very, very difficult problem. I think you could say that if you segment it into the easy ones, where it is truly obvious and everybody agrees, you can easily do that. But then after that, it all becomes like a gray area, and the middle part is really where most is and where all the cheating is going to take place. Second is the dissemination of that content. And I think that's really the difference between social media as kind of currently defined and SMS or WhatsApp. Because SMS and WhatsApp do not produce advertisement in the stream, and because they guarantee that anybody's message will be sent to all the recipients, they're not really providing a filter in the middle. Whereas social media sites generally do. They first of all they filter what you see. We've discussed this before here on Facebook. Even after you set the parameters for it to show you material from all of your friends, you have to go back and reset it again, because the moment you leave it just resets it back to what it wants to show you. So it controls what you see, and that not only applies to what you see from your friends, also what advertisements you see. So that makes them a little bit more responsible for things. But then really the flip side of that is that it's a business opportunity. I can see them say, for so many dollars per month, we will in fact filter all the material that we show you, and we make sure that you can turn the dial from, like, only show me the mathematically proven stuff at one end, and I have no idea at the other end. And that may actually be a way to solve this. Shaheen, done.
Yeah, my thought is there's a weird false dichotomy that it's either a very simple false trade-off between privacy and protection or security, when there's a third alternative, which is educate your idiotic populace to be immune to the shenanigans. Which, by the way, is more or less how it works in Scandinavia. Like, you couldn't do these kind of SMS messages in Norway because Norwegians are intelligent enough to realize, oh, this is bullshit. We're not falling for this, and that's why they don't. No one's trying to do it to them because it wouldn't work because they're intelligent. And the
Well,
problem is,
I think it's a bit of a lock and key situation. There is that while you're absolutely right that a whole class of misinformation can be detected with just a little bit of critical thinking, and societies have a responsibility to educate their population as such, it is also true that even the smartest of us will fall for it occasionally. And if the scam is sufficiently sophisticated, then it goes through. And that requires other safeguards, starting with making it illegal, such that just, honest people stay honest. But also, it's just a hard problem. So this is, I think, why it makes sense to segment the content into the obviously easy parts, the obviously easy from the other end, and then the stuff in the middle that is a gray area.
all right, moving right along. After surprising CPI data, the Nasdaq closes down 5%. Nvidia down nearly 10, Meta down nearly 10, Coinbase down nearly 10, Amazon down 7. Bitcoin fell nearly 10 in the past 24 hours. Stocks fell sharply on Tuesday after a key August inflation report came in hotter than expected, hurting investor optimism. Next up from CNN, after a package exploded at Northeastern University's VR center, sources say it included a rambling note criticizing Mark Zuckerberg and VR. So it sounds like the Unabomber 2.0, no pun intended. Or maybe it's 3.0. The authorities in Boston have launched an investigation after a package sent to Northeastern University exploded and injured a staff member, ostensibly at their VR department. So somebody's getting very worked up about the future of VR. That's very unfortunate. A survey of 5,000 emoji users in the U.S. Emoji users. Is that a category? Is that like
Mm-hmm.
is that like fork users?
I am definitely emoji user.
Are you in? Let me ask you. This is a safe space. If you're an emoji user, you can go ahead and let us know. You can
My
come
name
out.
is
Yeah,
my
you
name
can
is
use an
Miriam.
emoji now.
How long have
Yeah,
you been using emojis?
I am been using emoji for 10 years.
How did you start? What
Uh,
was the first emoji?
the first moment when I saw the smiley face, my heart melted and I felt
You
in
started.
heaven.
You
And
started with
then
a
I
smiley
saw the
face. Yeah,
yeah, and then I saw the one with the heart, and then I was just in forever.
and then next thing you know, you get into more and more exotic emojis because you got to get that fix. You started with the thumbs up like Irwin did, and then you went to the fist bump,
Yeah,
and
unfortunately.
it's never enough,
Yeah.
is it? You just slipping
Never
down
enough.
a slippery slope. Now you got the cowboy hat emoji. You got the cactus emoji. I know what happened. You went from the thumbs up to the fist bump to the crying with the watery eyes. Tell me I'm wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, as
And you
if you
were
would
hooked.
be reading my life, You see me like in a crystal ball. Emoji. Crystal ball emoji.
Hieroglyphics make so much more sense now.
So anyway, a survey of 5,000 emoji users, some of whom you might even know, in the U.S. finds that 91% of these emoji users think emojis make communication easier. Get that? Emoji users think it makes it easier. Um, yeah, well, that's what any addict would say, wouldn't they? 68% like emojis being used at work, because they're addicted. I mean, they just, you start off at home in a closet and then you don't even care anymore. You're doing it at the office. And the laughing with the double tears face, the one I'm talking about, you addict, is now the most popular emoji due in this survey. With Unicode's upcoming 15 release
Which
and a
one? The
slew
horizontal one or the one tilted 45 degree?
the regular one, not the 45-degree one, Cheryl.
That speaks
Share
like
one
that
face.
sounds like
You sure seem to
Cheryl.
know a lot about these emojis,
Yeah.
Cheryl.
Share, you have
Yeah, exactly.
exposure, you are addictive.
This is amazing, Cheryl. I'm so happy that I'm not alone on this stage. There are other people
No,
with me
in
who are.
Japan, before the emojis came trendy, we already have the line, cute line.
Uh,
Well,
Oh,
their own
Japan.
Aspiko,
emojis.
Please,
Aspiko
please,
Yeah, yeah.
emoji.
That's the reason
please, please.
why the line was so popular.
You don't. Let's not get started with how Japan created this whole category. By the way,
Yeah, and
Ah,
even now, if you have this Japanese keyboard input, you have this category that have all those lines and all those quotes to make all those spaces. You can
let
find
me
it.
You
let
can
me
even
make this perfectly clear.
customize your emojis, by the way.
Yeah, just to be perfectly clear, Japan deserves an incredible amount of credit for creating emojis. By the way, because I was doing emojis in Japan in 91, 92, and when they were pure text, and they got incredibly elaborate, by the way. They had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of text based, Unicode based emojis, and they still do. And the rest of the world didn't catch up until smartphones, or, I don't know, 2007 when the iPhone came out. Just something to consider. They had a 15-year head start, and really
Oh
legitimate.
no,
Yeah. By the way, part of
I'm
the
sorry, but
reason,
we were building in Poland. We were building cats and roses in those like yearly chats.
yeah,
So we used them also in 90s. Nine,
okay.
so and it was absolutely national obsession in the geek community, obviously. But
So
yes, we communicated in that.
one thing you'll notice if you dive into the Japanese emoji culture, is you'll notice that there's a lot of emphasis on the eyes as the way to express the emotion. And it's believed that in part, and as Miriam's demonstrating, the Western world focuses more so on the mouth as the main conveyor of emotion, like the laughing emojis, some of which have regular eyes and a big laughing mouth. So and somebody did a study on this at some point, and they found out that Japanese people, when they're trying to determine or discern the emotion of people in their photographs, tend to focus more on their eyes to determine if their state of emotion. And Westerners tend to have more of a preference in looking around the mouth for very subtle clues around the person's emotional state. And their emojis sort of prove that point. Very interesting point.
That
But
is
Oh
interesting,
no,
given
I
that
got it why they refuse to wear mask.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it.
yeah, Cheryl, that's a very profound insight, actually. And that's why the Japanese don't mind it, because they can still
So
communicate more.
that's why all the superheroes have masks and just revealing their chin and mouth, like
No,
Batman.
it's
And you know
interesting.
what is the most trendy eye makeup in Japan during the pandemic is smoky eyes.
Okay. So anyway, there's
By the way, the Tyler, the emoji, the English actually is derived from Japanese. It's emoji. E means space, moji means characters or letters or in language. So
yes.
this word is from Japanese directly.
Yeah, well, it's a concatenation of emotion and moji, which means characters.
Yeah,
Like
but
emotion.
the original is the pronunciation of emoji. E means cow, cow. So that means face. So moji is the letters or characters, Japanese characters.
Actually, no, actually, emo is more the katakana form of emotion. So it's emoji. They just combine. They love to combine the words and make it like very
Yeah,
simple.
if you,
Like
Oh.
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Tyler knows well. Yeah.
yeah, very well. Japanese love to combine two words that normally don't go together to make a new word, and emoji is a perfect example of that. And that's why I know like how with I think any native Japanese speaker would confirm this that it's a very clear example of it. That and by the way, for example, you have Romanji. It's very known that like alphabets in Japanese end in this G, like an emoji. So it's kind of a character set based on emotions. So emoji makes you could somebody a Japanese person who's never heard of the word emoji, never heard of it. You could take somebody out of a cave who's been in a cave for 50 years and be like, "Hey, there's this new thing called emojis." They would know what it is just based on they would know intuitively. Oh, it's emotional character set based on like some. So
Yeah,
that's why it's such a
exactly.
clever word. And
Kanji,
again, yeah,
romanji,
kanji,
emoji.
romanji, yeah, exactly. So uh, all the character sets end in this G. So emoji is a character set based on emotions. It makes perfect sense. And that's why I'm saying it's not a surprise that the word even is Japanese, because that's how much influence and how kind of rightful this whole category belongs to the Japanese. So credit to our Japanese friends for pioneering emojis. Anyway, the whole point of this article is that there's some data that came out. 73% of U.S. emoji users, that's the craziest cohort name I can imagine, as if there's people who don't, there's non-emoji users. Is that a cohort? And like people who refuse to use emojis? Uh, 73% of US emoji users think people who use emojis are friendlier, funnier, and cooler than those who don't. Well, yeah, of course, because they want their friends to be addicted right along with them. That's how addiction works. Is you want other people to join in your downward spiral. So emojis make communication easier. 91% of US emoji users agree that emoji makes it easier for them to express themselves, because they don't feel like their normal selves when they're not using emoji. That's one of the telltale signs of addiction is you can no longer feel like your normal self without using it. And the top three emojis that make you more likable are the kissy lips, the happy face with the hearts around it that make you look like you're being hugged, and then the dual hearts on the eyes, smiling face. Using those will make you more likable, and make you less likable is the protruding purple eggplant and the frown face and the poo, the classic poo emoji. Those will make you less likable. So for those of you who are socially inept, take note. So the US emoji users agree that using emoji at work can help users. And the top 3 misunderstood emojis is the cowboy hat, the cherries, and the upside down emoji head. The upside down smile. Okay. The desire for more inclusive emojis is growing. Like a character in a wheelchair, a character with a visibility stick, like somebody with impaired vision, somebody kneeling as if they're doing Muslim prayer. 2 in 5 US emoji users feel their identities are not reflected in current emoji options. That's 40%. 40% of people feel excluded from emojis. And maybe that's why there's people who are not emoji users. And if there's people who sincerely want someone walking with a cane as if they're vision impaired, do vision impaired people really use emojis? Would be an interesting question. Anywho, interesting report, and there's a whole new set coming out soon. We'll find out what they are soon. Twilio plans to lay off 11% of its workforce, or around 850 people, in a bid to become more profitable next year. And Meta plans to test Discord-like community chats in Messenger and Facebook groups, offering categories, audio and video channels, admin-only chats, and more as they try to clone Discord's popularity, and as another variation on a theme around social audio. And Singapore-based company called Foz, whose business accounts offer paying. They raise a bunch of money. Who cares? A whole bunch of fundraisings as usual. Chinese regulators approve paid games for Tencent and NetEase for the first time since July 2021. And GM's Cruise built 4 self-driving car chips in-house to be deployed by 2025, including for the car's main brains, for processing sensor data and for radar. Google signs a cooperative research and development agreement with the US NIST to develop new nanotechnology and semiconductor devices with open source designs. Twitter says that a preliminary count shows that shareholders have voted to approve Elon Musk's proposal, and we covered that yesterday, and so that means we're at the end of the big boring messages for today, and we get to go into the tweets as we always do. Did anyone have a tweet that they want to make sure we cover today with the 20 minutes we have remaining? Okay, jumping right in. PT Yoder just found this one that I'm now retweeting, like we do with all the tweets, to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, which Cheryl will kindly pin to the top of the room so you can follow the Twitter account. Oh, and before I forget, if you would love to help me with my ongoing Google ranking review situation, as nearly everyone on stage has, thank you very much for everyone who has. And if you haven't, I would love you to simply DM me on my personal Twitter account in my bio, or the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, and I'll send you the link. It takes literally 2 seconds, and I appreciate it. So back to the tweet here from PT Yoder from Reuters. Walmart backed fintech company to test banking services in coming weeks. Okay. And scientists obtain effects through virtual reality comparable to those of psychedelic drugs. This is interesting from Thomas Tong. A paper published in the Journal of Scientific Reports demonstrates how virtual reality group experiences can produce responses similar to those triggered by psychoactive drugs or psychedelic drugs or psychoactive drugs such as hallucinogenic mushrooms or LSD, describing the sensations that arose immediately following a left hemisphere stroke. Brain scientist Jill Taylor recounted, quote, "I could no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end because the atoms and molecules of my arm blend with the atoms and molecules of the wall, and all I could detect was this energy. I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me, and because I could no longer identify with the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all energy that was, and it was beautiful." As anyone who's done very high doses of psychoactive drugs knows, that very beautiful experience. The neuroanatomist's account is one of many well-known examples of self-transcendent experiences. Yes, exactly right. The ego dissolution, as it's known in the psychedelic community, where your ego dissolves because your body sort of dissolves and joins with the ever-present ubiquitous energy, which is known as sort of Gaia, and it goes under other names in other cultures. Anyway, the self-transcendent experience, a term coined to describe transient mental states in which the subjective sense of oneself as an isolated entity can temporarily fade into an experience of oneness with other people in the environment, involving the dissolution of boundaries between the sense of self and others. That's, again, as it's called, boundary dissolution or ego dissolution. Quote, "Getting lost while you're reading a book or during a writing of a computer code are everyday examples of a relatively weak self-transcendent experience." Yeah, an incredibly weak one at that. According to David Glowacki, an expert on virtual reality. And however, the profound sense of interdependence with the cosmos that arises from a mystical experience or an encounter with God represents a considerably more intense form of this type of experience, he says. And he also leads the Nano VR project, in which new forms of nanoscale design will be developed through virtual reality. Recent research. The article gets off track and starts promoting this guy's personal efforts a little too much. Anyway, what's interesting is VR is still, even though it's been going for decades, actually, still in a sort of an infancy. And one of the things that I think will be truly enlightening or enabling by the technology is that there will be people who have had heroic doses of psilocybin, and again, that's an insider term, that have had profound experiences, of which VR could be a way to communicate and experience those experiences collectively. And there's going to be a tremendous desire to do this. You're going to have psychonauts, again, insider term, who like to voyage into the psychedelic domains. They would love to, and many of them are coders, by the way. The history of developers is inseparable from LSD and psilocybin. You could ask Steve Jobs personally if you doubt me on that one. And there's a tremendous desire to see how VR might be a catalyst for in bringing people into this experience, because once you've had that experience, your life is forever changed for the better. And it's commonly said amongst people who have experienced this that we should require everyone to do this, when they turn 18 or something, because the world would be just a much more peaceful place. Because once you've had that experience and you realize we're all one energy, and we're different, and we're manifesting as limbs on a tree or flowers in a field temporarily, that although we very quickly return as dust to the earth below, but we are what lives in us, this electricity that causes us life, is in fact all interconnected through all living things, and that becomes incredibly uh, uh, discernible during the psychedelic experience at high doses, as VR could, if designed with this intent. That's the key, and I assure you there will be people who've had this experience who will intentionally try to design VR experiences to convey the psychedelic experience, and they won't rest until they achieve their end goal. And so I don't know what experiences this article is about, if they're just playing in Facebook, or some other silly games or whatnot. But boy, wait until these things evolve and you get these experiences that are intended from the start to envelop the user into a psychedelic experience, and a collective one at that. Shit's gonna get weird. So
I
That's
I'm
just
found
the natural continuation of like Alex Curry's art. So what you see in two-dimensional art and actually three-dimensional.
I've been in rooms like this. I've been in a VR set with this kind of psychedelic artworks, and it is incredible. And it's very, quest to very basic in a certain way, because Quest 2 has its own limitations and the graphics and everything, but it is very impressive and interesting experience. And the best part of it is that you can take VR glasses off at any time when on a psychedelic trip, your brain is actually affected, which is makes it a little bit more dangerous than just something that happens to your sensory output. Now, if you add additional senses to, like, smell, touch, whatever, to that experience, that would be a very, very interesting thing to experiment with. But it is fun. It is definitely fun, and it definitely expands mind even in that limited form.
It would be interesting to note or to see if whether some of the visual artifacts, like I would call them post-processing effects or texture phenomenon, so all of a sudden a smooth texture feels very rugged, like a landscape, for example. If you were to engage those kinds of phenomenon, does that then trigger some other ancillary effects? So the kind of things that happen to your sensory integration, which is what I think Tyler was referring to when he said that there's this kind of ego loss that's actually described by some Oxford scientists on, I think Mike from Vsauce did an episode on taking ayahuasca, going to Peru, and then being monitored and so on. So Oxford's really cool for that. And they saw that your integration of your proprioception, which is where your body boundaries are, that actually gets disrupted by some of these chemicals, and that's actually part of the reason why you feel this blurring of the boundary between you and the environment. But to what extent can those neural circuits be engaged if you're not necessarily driving them chemically? Could be a very fruitful therapeutic avenue, as then you could have a sort of treatment as software. And in fact, we see that already with ADHD treatments. There is an FDA approved game that's used as a treatment for people, and it's said to be quite effective. So the realm of games is actually quite applicable here, and very real and potential therapeutic value.
Okay, world's first direct air electrolyzer makes hydrogen from humidity. Australian researchers have developed and tested a way to electrolyze hydrogen straight out of the air anywhere on Earth without requiring any other fresh water. Okay. A breach of software maker used to backdoor as many as 200,000 servers. Okay. Bacterial vesicles coated on gold nanoparticles to combat TB. I guess they mean tuberculosis. They do. researchers from an Indian Institute of Sciences have designed a new method to deliver a vaccine candidate for tuberculosis. China lists nearly 9,000 little giants to become a bigger tech powerhouse amid escalating tensions with the U.S. China wants to secure its supply chain and reduce dependencies on technology imports. Oh, yeah. Wow. You just figured that out. China's first home-built passenger airplane could take a big step forward this month. The country aims to break up the long-held duopoly of Boeing and Airbus with its new airliner model, like it has a choice. You're not going to be getting parts anymore. Now, and by the way, so officially it's Russia that has been sanctioned, so they can no longer get the parts that they need to fix the airplanes that they stole, by the way, because the airplanes that Aeroflot has were not owned by Aeroflot. They were renting them. And the companies, usually based in Ireland, who owned those airplanes said, well, we're going to come and get those planes back. And Russia said, no bother, comrade. We're going to keep them nice and warm for you here. And so Russia stole all of the airplanes, although it won't matter because those things need repair very frequently and need parts brought in very frequently. And those parts will not be coming. So you can now understand why China is such what an interesting coincidence that China's got this hot new focus to build its own airplanes with its own parts. And this is why China's first home-built passenger airplane might, actually have a test flight this month. Because China knows where this is all going. As I've been saying where this has been going for months, nearly a year. That this is all about the mass decoupling of the West and China, and it's now become obvious. I was saying this a year ago when no doubt half the room was laughing. No one's laughing anymore. This is just obvious at this point. China knows goddamn well we're going to put them under very similar sanctions to what's going on in Russia. And that's why this meeting between Xi and Putin in Uzbekistan, or is it Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan?
Uzbekistan.
Thank you. So they're meeting in Uzbekistan tomorrow to talk about Taiwan and Ukraine because they're not going to be happy at all. As much as I hope, I pray that Nicholas and our friends are right, that Xi's going to tell Putin to chill out and not escalate and not mobilize. If I had to bet, I would say he is going to. And that's not a prediction, but it almost is because I know I connect dots. And the way these dots are lining up, it looks like he doesn't really have much of a choice. I will not be at all surprised if he mobilizes. I won't be surprised at all. And I really will regret it, and I pray it doesn't happen. But the reason I say that is because they can't stomach or tolerate or accept the alternative, which is that China and Russia become larger versions of North Korea if this trend continues with what the West has in mind for Russia and China. And they know it. They completely know it. And they both know it, and they're unwilling to accept it. So you've now poked, as Nicholas perfectly said, you've cornered the tiger. Now what? And that's what that meeting's about. And the tiger and the panda bear are going to get together and figure out how they're going to respond to the having been cornered as they are. Although in Russia's case, it's very real. It's very tangible and obvious. In China's case, it's I think equally obvious to those who study these things, but it's not yet known or understood or accepted by the mass public. But China knows it to be true, and that's all that matters. So, and articles like this tell you everything you need to know. They're in a frantic race to build their own everything, to build everything independent of the West, because they know what's coming. So I look at that article as in a different light than I think most people do. It's a really, really, really interesting article that highlights the inevitable future of this grand decoupling that China's painfully aware of.
But I think China and Russia have also make baby steps forward, right? Because right now they officially can do exchange between the yuan and the ruble, and then they can buy their natural resources in those two currency. So I think maybe they really, you know, I guess sanction is also part of the calculation, but to go on to the AI chips is probably too much because they can't replenish their weapons and military equipment.
Okay.
And yeah,
Next is a
I'm
very
I'm not
technology is going to
sure.
stall.
Just very briefly, I'm not sure that if we look back at this in 50 years, if you're still here, that it's necessarily going to be a bad thing to have a little bit more redundancy in the world, though, a little bit more, more than one option to buy chips. Part of the issue, and not just chips, everything. Having a single global gas
Yes.
station, a single global supply of the small feature-sized chips, a single global source of, it's asking a lot for 8+ billion people to coordinate and trust to that level. So I think long term it may not.
But
You
I
can
think
imagine on top of,
I also agree with Tyler that
yeah,
I think after this meeting, most likely there will be this escalation.
That's why we'll find out soon enough.
I hope so.
Yeah, I pray to God that meeting they decide. You know what? We're all apologies. Turns out you're not Nazis after all, and whatever they say. Who cares? It's more about what they do after. But what they say will be equally interesting after that meeting. No doubt, Xi's going to say that this part's easily to predict. Xi's going to say, "Oh, well, I told him to de-escalate." I mean, regardless of what he actually says in the meeting, the formal announcement afterwards is obvious. There's this is, it doesn't get more obvious. He's going to say, "Oh, well, yeah, we met, and I told him to, he's got to come to the table and negotiate and not escalate." And yeah, of course, he's going to say that publicly. But
I'm
anyway, the next one's
scared.
really,
I'm scared.
yeah. Well, are you in Poland?
No, I'm in New York, but I am
Okay.
scared for the world. I just really, really pray that that the People's Republic of China will have some pragmatism,
Hmm.
and that they will kind of play the game, meaning the game would be to pretend that they are on the Russian side, pretend that they are on the peace side, and be there on their own side, which I think is the healthiest attitude. And if they are on their own side, they will not do too much to help Russia, because I
Well, the
don't think
good thing is
it will help
both both
anyone.
both of the gentlemen are very egoless, very uh, they're not power seeking in any kind of way. So they're just going to make the best decision for the people, that they can. So, let's see what happens. So the next article is from Thomas Tong that a 1 megawatt vertical axis wind turbine could change offshore wind farms forever. And it's a whole new style of wind turbine. You're probably familiar with the classical wind turbine, which looks like a huge windmill or a modern version of a windmill. And this one's totally different. It looks completely different. It's this massive rotating thing sitting just above the ocean, um, oh, that I guess is more efficient. Vertical axis wind turbine instead of horizontal axis wind turbines. It looks crazy. It looks very cool. Anyway, if you can get a megawatt of energy out of it, I'm all for it. And they're floating vertical axis wind turbines. Love it. Let's hope it works. The next is, oh, by the way, I learned of a wave energy harnessing startup based out of Oakland, California, that just finished a pilot in San Diego, California, off the coast of La Jolla, and they are harnessing very impressive amounts of power from ocean currents. And it seems to be very legitimate and very, very impressive because that shit can scale, because that shit is 24-hour, 365. unlike most green energies, like wind and solar and what have you, they're intermittent because the sun goes down, the wind stops at certain times. Ocean currents are rather endless. Waves are rather endless, although variable, but not nearly to the extent that wind and solar are, obviously. So this could be truly phenomenal if this company out of Oakland, it's called Cali Wave is the name of the company, Kali Wave, like California Wave. Looks very, very promising, I have to say. Anyway, God bless them. They're doing God's work. Katerina found one that the Army is using drone swarms against soldiers in training. What? They're using drone swarms. Whoever could have predicted that? Pre-deployment training in the Army now involves dealing with swarms of armed drones. My goodness. Whoever thought of such a thing? I do remember some aging, balding tech bro coming in here and telling us that that would be an inevitable thing in the very near future. And holy cow, sure enough, here it is in a headline from Katerina. So thank you for that one, Katerina. And Katerina also has the next one from Washington Post. Oh, you shared it an hour or so ago about the desperate need for teachers, about the teacher shortage. Some states are lowering the job requirements. States facing acute teacher shortages have stopped requiring college degrees for job candidates. I have to say, having been a teacher in California's schools, specifically the LA Unified School District, specifically at its worst schools, or most challenging schools, that I'm absolutely stunned that the other teachers who I was, sitting next to in the lunchroom had college degrees of any kind. And even if they had, I imagine they had PhDs in not giving a fuck, because the doors are open between the hallways. Teachers can look across the hallways and see each other. They're not doing jack shit in a lot of the LA Unified School District, so I don't know that requiring a college degree means much of anything in LA Unified schools. I think they should be testing for energy level. It's incredibly challenging. It's physically challenging in schools these days, and stamina and endless positivity and just a burning hunger to improve young minds and indiscriminately. And that's what they should be testing
You can
for.
use a different approach, right? Because
Yeah.
what is the retirement age in America? 65.
Retirement age in America, around there, you could say that, yeah.
Okay, why don't you just engage those retirees who are still energetic and wants to teach the younger generation America to make America better, and then just
England does
rehire
that for
them
people in
because
Africa.
they not just have the education, academic background, but they have the life experiences and the work experiences to teach good values to the young children. You know what I'm trying to say?
It would work, but in less instances than you would probably imagine or hope.
Yeah, I taught in America, and it's a very weird experience. And actually having, and I am under 50, and I felt I was old, and I was teaching this 5 years ago. So being over 40, when you teach 16 years olds, you already feel like you are in different generation. You don't understand the TikTok culture. You don't understand, like, even though I am actually, I am a just being on Facebook versus being on TikTok
Yeah.
makes you kind of not understanding 100% what's going on in the heads of those kids. When you put a
Yeah.
60, 70 years old person, the generational differences will be enormous. And the kids are so disrespectful, so hurtful. It's so
I'm not
difficult to work
sure.
with them.
But because nowadays, in
Hey,
many countries, the
Cheryl,
parents need to work, right? So usually it's the grandparents who take care of the children. I mean,
I
the
get that,
teenagers
but
and the
I
kids.
agree 1,000% with what Miriam just said, and I believe ideally the younger the teacher, the better,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the the energy level will be much higher, the ability to empathize with the student will be much higher, the ability for the student to empathize with the teacher will be much higher, because the wider the age gap, the less able they are to connect, and the student will just write off and not be able to relate in any kind of, they won't be able to relate with each other in any kind of way. I mean, forget.
to to prove the
uh,
point, I sorry that I'm kind of cutting, but just to prove the point, yeshivas, the ultra orthodox, there's a lot of discussion right now about Hasidic yeshivas. So yeshivas, which is a little bit different than Hasidic, they fired all the older rabbiim, all the older teacher, and I was like heartbroken because friends of mine and friends of, like, they really cleaning up, and they said, like, if you're over 60, forget it, we need younger teachers. So if the frum Jewish world, which is obsessed with respect to elders, which is obsessed with tradition, is not able to sustain the system in which older teachers are teaching, can you imagine what's going on in a secular education?
Another
In
fun fact
America,
from
in New
Denmark.
York.
Another fun fact from Denmark is that there was a survey just a couple of weeks ago that showed that young teachers starting to become teachers, they leave the teaching industry after 1 year, 31%.
Guaranteed.
So there's something more systemic at play here than just old teachers or young teachers. And I think one of the topics that's really difficult for any teacher is that most kids, like my own kids, will say, well, I can just Google all information. So what is the role of the teacher and where's the respect for the teacher? And
I
I
got,
think that
yeah.
the main thing has to be that you have to teach young kids how to learn fake news from real news, from facts from opinions. And that transformation will take a whole lot of work of how to adapt the schooling system into the current reality that are in a great way being formed by tech, especially for the young children in school. Susie from Denmark, thank you.
Taylor, I'm sorry I cut you off, so maybe you
No,
want to finish the thought. I'm so
no, no,
sorry.
no. I'm glad that other people get to hear somebody who has firsthand experience with it, because it's not what you think it is. Just like the 30% of people who quit after the first year, I'll bet you there's another 30% who quit within 5 years, and then you're left with 30% after 5 years.
So they have teacher shortage, right?
Yes, that's what the head
Enormous.
is about.
Yep. So instead of going down the requirement, why don't they just? Well, I'm not saying everybody is qualified, but
No, no, I completely applaud this removing of the college university degree element, because I don't think that's the main character. That's not the main variable that makes the difference. I think you can have people who didn't go to college, um, who can be fantastic teachers. I completely believe that, and I believe you could do a hardcore training, um, in less than a year for teachers that would be far more effective. Uh, I think you could even do it in a few months, given the seriousness of the shortage. Um, and it should be an all hands on deck issue. This is a crisis that people are just not really aware of, but a lot of the societal problems that we're facing, and somebody just referenced it, is the need to educate the tragic, the desperate need to educate people on critical thinking and discerning between legitimate news and fake news and all this. This is part of and the elections, the democracy depends on an educated voter. And it works in Scandinavia. You have educated voters in Scandinavia. That's why they're not in the crazy, mess that the U.S. finds itself in at the moment to some degree, and because the U.S. is electing, people it should have no business electing, and you're gonna. I just saw an amazing video about this, about why celebrities have an unfair advantage in elections. It's truly amazing um, video, but that I can't. It'd take way too long to explain the premise. But uh, I'll just end with my favorite quote. Like, the scariest thing about American democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Like, these people should not be voting. They're not, they don't, we have tests to do pretty much everything in a governmental sense. Driving a car, you have to take a test. To make somebody a tuna sandwich, you have to be licensed as a restaurant, and there's checks to make sure you're doing it properly in guidelines. Could we not have some kind of voter cognizance, aptitude ability that you actually understand what you're voting on? And I'm not even talking about uh, presidential candidates. I'm talking about every bill on the ballot. Do you even understand the issue that you're voting on when you mark yes or no? And that goes back to the headline we read an hour ago, that there's intentional SMS driven campaigns trying to confuse people that yes, if you vote yes on Proposition 5, that's vote that will, end abortion or keep abortion, whichever it was, as the article said. Because the person voting in the voting booth honestly doesn't know. That's the level of education that we have descended into, that they can't even read the ballot and understand voting yes means for or against. So there's intentional misinformation campaigns that are capitalizing on precisely that, their own
If
miseducation.
if I may add a couple of points, Tyler.
Sure.
Yeah, wonderful direction. I think the conversation is going, and for a couple of reasons. As you're talking about teachers and the value of a teacher, and I won't talk for too long, but I want to hit on a few points here, if I may. And when we talk about teachers, it's important to understand, as we're talking about qualifications and credentials, we have to understand what is a teacher. And it seems to be maybe on the face of it a very obvious answer. That is, it's a person who just teaches and provides information and gives us knowledge. But if we look at it historically in the context of culture, uh, there was a fairly big gap historically between the teacher, the professor, and the student, and that gap is closing culturally speaking. And this, I think, goes back to the points that were being made earlier about identifying with the teacher, the professor, the instructor, and going to the credentials of it. What is a teacher? It's someone who inspires, who provides the the information you need to be successful in life. And I think politically, indeed, it has been used, as we have seen on a local level throughout the United States. That value of the teacher is kind of being used in a really corrupted way. And to say, what is it that we can now infuse into the educational system so that we pass along the information we want to convey to these children, whether it's issues related to whatever cultural or moral standard you want to, live by. So this conversation is so important because we are now reinforcing to each other, what we have all known growing up. It is the value of an education. And we know that that value informs us as who we are as citizens, as contributors to society, as parents, as mothers, as just people trying to live a productive life, but also to try to live a somewhat civil life. And it is being used by politicians and others as a tool. But I think if we sort of maintain the independence of our educational system and we try to put into those places of power, which are the teachers, empower them to do what is necessary so that we can provide that information, provide that knowledge so that they can be successful. That's the goal. And if that hindrance to achieving that goal is establishing a fairly high standard of education, meaning that here's the minimum qualifications you must maintain, absolutely. Uh, and I don't say this in a pejorative way, to lower the standard, to say what is actually the minimum criteria. Yes, you need to have some sort of basic minimum, but at some point we need to understand there's other characteristics and qualifications that we're looking for to allow teachers to succeed and our society to succeed. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, just great direction in which the conversation is going. I think hopefully our local and state educational systems will start valuing, truly valuing, not just economically in terms of paying teachers what they're due, but also valuing the importance of what they are doing uh, for all of us. It's really important. Thank you. My name is Uther, and I'm done speaking.
In Korea, they call teachers nation builders, so I think we can learn something from the way Asia treats its teachers.
But Tyler, I just want to
I,
clarify one point. Just now when I meant by those retired business people, right, to go back to teaching if they still have the energy, because I mean, based on in Singapore, there is this tertiary school called polytechnics. Usually, those lecturers are industry people, people who used to work in industry, so they really teach practical things. So it comes to so-called along the way, right, across the years, eventually people feel that if after secondary school, that means okay, secondary school in Singapore, right? If they go to polytechnic, which is the tertiary school that I mentioned about, instead of going straight to a junior college and then go university, they seem to be better off if they go to a polytechnic because those lecturers there are usually more practical. Compared to a high school like a junior college, whereby those teachers there are trained teachers. That means they have most of them have no industrial experience. They are just came up from the university for teachers, well, the institute for teachers, and so they are trained to be a teacher, but they have no industrial experience. But people with industrial experience, they are actually able to teach more practical skills to the students. So that's the reason why I thought, if the retirement age is 65 and most Americans are still young and genki, right? So if they choose to want to go back to teach the kids, why not let them do it instead of, because usually they will be able to train and they'll be better in
Yeah.
teaching
So
value
Cheryl,
system, critical thinking, and
right. But the quote that Susan gave about, I think it was Susan, that 30% of teachers are quitting after 1 year.
mm-hmm.
Those are young, fresh. Those are the youngest of the youngest kids right
They're
out
the
of school.
trained teachers, kind of like out from the
Yeah,
teachers
that number
college. Yeah.
will radically increase
Mm.
as the age of the teacher increases. So I would expect if you were to take a cohort of retired folks who had ambitions to do this, I would imagine it would be in the 95% would be quitting after 1 month, somewhere in that ballpark, because it's not what they think it is. So I would actually be hugely in favor, hugely. I'm actually very upset and stunned that what's happening in American classrooms on is not widely known and understood and discussed on national TV shows on a nightly basis, because it would
yeah,
horrify you what's going on in these classrooms. It,
absolutely.
Tyler,
yeah,
Can
this
I
is
just
Irvin.
jump one? I was just one thing that is really important that we should discuss. It's not only about the teachers and people and employment. It's about the system of the schools, amount of bureaucracy that the teachers, amount of hours that the
yep,
teachers have to spend outside of the classroom to do things, and they are not paid for it. The fact that they have unpaid vacations, people don't realize that, in Poland, for example, teachers are paid for vacations. So you have 2 months that you can plan your work and your year. And in America, they deduce from the payments, those 2 months. So they get lower pay because they're not paid for these 2 months. There are so many things that could be improved to make life of teachers easier outside of what Tyler was just saying, which is unimaginable what these kids are doing. Amount of kids being arrested in schools, amount of violence, amount of foul language. People have no clue outside.
no
And
clue,
Tyler, you're making
no clue.
amazing point. Hmm?
The closest thing that you've seen to what's
Tyler,
going on inside of these schools is a fucking UFC match. That's how
Mm.
crazy it is in these classrooms.
So very
Yeah,
ill
and put
disciplined.
In
yeah,
fact,
there's yeah.
I had classes when, as a teacher, you often have to fill in for other teachers who need to go attend emergencies or have to take days off unexpectedly or whatever. And you would go in and fill those classrooms. In my earlier days of not having the skills, very often my classes would become actual UFC matches. on hard floors for money. And we're talking sixth grade. We're talking 12-year-olds to 18-year-olds fighting for money in the classroom for the entire hour that you're supposed to be studying history. So I would love to have a hidden camera expose. Where are the whistleblowers? We have the whistleblowers at Facebook and Twitter. Or there's with the whistleblower for Twitter's literally testifying as we speak. Before a massive court. It's like the biggest court case of the year. And in part he's a big whistleblower of what's going on at Twitter. There's whistleblowers for Facebook. Where's the whistleblowers on what's going on in these classrooms? Because this is
So the root cause of all this is not the teachers, it's more the kids are not disciplined by their parents, right? That's why they don't behave themselves.
that's a big part of it. It's a big part of it.
Okay,
Right.
And
so Tyler, can I
yeah,
say
Irvin.
something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that one of the things that we as Americans have to realize that as we move further into this century, teachers, depending on where they are, what state they're in, it's going to become weaponized. And unfortunately, it's going to be weaponized by the committees that work in the local school districts and state, as far as what is being taught and how it's being taught. Um, I think one of the reasons young people tend to get disillusioned very quickly is because they come into a situation not really equipped out of college to step into those roles, and then find out that they don't have all the tools that are necessary to fulfill those aspirations of being a teacher. Some of them come in with great hopes, but then they look at the outside market, and there are other places that they can go and make a lot more money without the stress of having to be babysitters for somebody else's kids. And I think that's
Right.
what's happening.
Yeah, that is
Yeah,
what's happening.
one other thing, if I may add, was that so I pondered the issue of maybe going into teaching and substituting after I retired from government a year ago, and I retired relatively early, so I figured I had a good another 10, 20 years but to work, and I'm doing other things. I'm teaching other things related to health and fitness, and one of the things I've seen as I met more people who were teachers, what they've said is that they've gotten out of the field for a number of reasons, some of whom retired recently, and this is one of the things that's one of the dynamics contributing to the shortage. Quite a few retirements over the pandemic, but one of the things they said was that they just don't have control of their environments anymore. Not only in terms of what goes on in the classroom and the chaos that sometimes you have when you're dealing with kids of various ages, but also the administrative issues and the politicization of the environment. I totally agree with Irvin here in terms of weaponization, and I would probably use the term more uh, politicization of the what was otherwise a an independent and free of political influence environment, the schools. And that's at least that's the environment in which I grew up. I never knew what the political leanings of my teachers were. But I think if politicians would have their way right now, they would want to use the teachers as sort of another voice of their sort of political, expression. And this is sort of going off on a tangent, but the schools, as a lot of communities were designed as sort of the centers of these neighborhoods, and schools were built around them. That's even the case in many suburban areas. But recognizing that, politicians today see it as not just a polling place, but a place it's a platform. And the local school systems and the school boards are recognizing that, and I think it's extremely dangerous. You know, I'm certainly not for people having their religious views, even to some extent, understanding that there is that diversity of religions that we have in this country. That makes us the great country that it is. But once you have one, or whatever religion you pick of that community is now sort of, associated with sort of the policies and the administration of the schools. If it's a public school, that's a problem. That's a real problem, and that's the direction it seems we're going. And I can see why a lot of kids during the pandemic were struggling during this pandemic academically, their parents have chosen to take them out of schools and homeschool them. So that's another developing trend there. Thank you. I'm author done speaking.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.